Welcome to Central Sierra Continuum of Care's HMIS training. Today we're going to focus on the coordinated entry system within our HMIS. This is the sign-on screen for Bell Data HMIS, and you'll arrive here through a link that will be sent to you via email from Bell Data once your user ID has been created. Once you've entered your password, you select Login, and it's going to take you immediately to your agency name and HMIS only. Now you can select from here coordinated entry for both fields, and that will take you directly to coordinated entry. This is our home screen, and in this screen we can switch between coordinated entry and your agency's HMIS work group. And to do that, you will select the top box and choose your selection. I'm going to select ATCA. And you can also open up other parts of the menu where there's a up or down arrow. That means that that menu can be expanded or closed. So this client menu here is open. I'm going to close it. To open it again, I just select the down arrow. Wherever there's a down arrow, there'll be sub-menus within that. We had switched over to a different work group, to ATCA HMIS only, and I want to go back to coordinated entry. And the way we do that is we select from the top box there, the drop-down arrow, select coordinated entry, and in the lower box, coordinated entry will default. And now we're in the home screen of coordinated entry. It's in our home screen where we're going to search for our clients. The best way to do that is to use the first two letters of the first and last name to enter a limited parameters so that we get the widest return on our list. So I'm looking for test client. I've found them. So I'm going to click on the link, and that's going to open up the client demographic screen for that client. Now, if we need to edit any of the information in our client demographic screen, the way we do that is we go to this little icon here, click Edit, and that opens up the fields where we can actually change information. So I am going to change one thing. Let's say we need to change the social. So when I change anything, the update bar will light up and we can select update. And we've made our changes. Now we've completed the demographic information for our client, and now we want to make sure that we've got an address for them. So we go down to client address info, and we can see that we have 1, 2, 3 address records for this client already. If I wanted to add one, I could just click add, and it'll open up the fields necessary to fill out. We're going to cancel that. We're going to go and review these other addresses that we have and to make sure that they're not duplicated. And then we're going to edit this one just to include the county. I'm going to just put Amador. You'd want to get any other contact information you can for the client, phone numbers, email address, mailing address, etc. So I'm going to update that. And it's important to, if you do need to include a new address for the client, make sure to add one as opposed to editing an existing one, because we'd like to keep that traceability and history for the client intact. So add, don't edit. The process of adding a new client is similar. We're going to first have to do a search with the client name. Then that will deliver a list, and if we don't see our client on this list, we can select Add, and I'm just going to add to our string of test clients. And the mandatory fields are the ones with the red asterisks, so we'll want to fill those out. Now they'll ask about the quality of some information. Date of birth quality, if it looks like it's a reasonable date of birth and it seems to be accurate, you can select full date of birth recorded. Social Security as well. If a client gives you just zeros, you know they probably don't know what the Social Security number is, but you have options here depending on what you determine to be the quality of the information. I'm going to just select that. Gender comes from a drop-down list, as does ethnicity and race. This question, sex on birth certificate and sexual orientation, these are not HUD mandated fields. You don't need to enter those unless your agency receives funding from a funder that requires that information along with the client demographic information. So, all right, we're done entering that. I'm going to select Save, and there's our new client. You notice it's generated a card ID for that client, and that shows up at the bottom. Now that we've learned how to search for and add a new client, it's time to join some clients together as a household and enter them into a project. So we're going to call up our test client. And the test client is going to be our head of household or applicant for the project. Now I want to link them to another household member. So I'm going to select Linked Household Members down on the menu. And here we've got one already set up in the system. Test client 5 is linked to test client. So if I wanted to add another household member, I would click that 3-bar icon and I would add. It's going to ask me to do a search again. And let's say we want to add test client 6 to the household. And it's going to come up with their client demographic information, although we're not in the client demographic screen. And here it's going to ask us down at the bottom to define the relationship between test client, which is what shows up here, and our test client 6. So we're going to say that it's the daughter. And the question then asks, does this person live in the same household as the applicant? If yes, we want to select yes, and they would be enrolled in the same project. If no, they would not be enrolled in the same project. So I'm going to select Update. And now we have 2 household members linked to our test client, who is our applicant and our head of household. Now to make this process of demonstrating project entry easier, I am going to remove one. So if you have a client that leaves the household, they move, they're living with a different parent or something, and they're not going to be enrolled in the same project, the way you do that is with this little pencil icon here. You can simply select Remove. It's going to ask you to confirm that. And now we see we only have test client 5 linked to our test client. So we're going to leave it at that, so we only have 2 family members who will be entering into the project. When enrolling clients into a project, we always start with the head of household. So our head of household in this case is test client. So we'll have to search for them. We select that record, and this is their client demographic record. We want to go now down to the project information screen, and this is where we're going to choose the type of project that the client is in. So the date information was collected here, defaults to the date that you opened the form. If you had collected that information prior and are now just entering it on the form, you'd want to enter that date that you collected the information. The project in coordinated entry is just the SPDAT survey. There is no other, so we select that. Project status will be active. That's by default. That's okay to leave it as such. Caseworker field is not populated. We don't use that for coordinated entry. Project start date defaults to the day that you open the form, and that's fine. And to save that information, we just hit the little plus sign, and now we have our project header record. From our project header screen, our next screen will be client enters project. So we select that. And this brings us to the adult client and head of household screen. The test client was our applicant, our head of household, so we're going to start with them. We always start with the head of household or applicant. HMIS sees them as the same, and we define the relationship of that person to the rest of the household, and that's self-head of household. There can only be one head of household in HMIS. That's typically your applicant. Client location will default to our COC number. The date information was collected will default to the day that you're doing this. You can backdate that if necessary. Project start date will be the date that you are entering this form. You want to make sure to capture veteran status, yes or no. We'll just mark yes there. Disabling condition, yes or no. You have other options if the client doesn't know or the client refuses. Those are options. We would prefer to have them definitive and either no or yes. We'll select no. And then type of residence at entry. These are HUD defined fields, so these are HUD housing situations, and we're just going to put emergency shelter. It's going to ask what the length of stay in the prior living situation was. We'll just mark 1 night or less. This is all self-reported by the client, so you just get the best information you can. Approximate date homeless started. I'm just going to backdate it a day. Then number of times homeless in the past 3 years, including today. Just mark 1 time. Total number of months homeless in the past 3 years. We'll just mark that. Then any comments you want to add, you can add her on the entry comments line. Project exit date comes later. We won't worry about that now. Once we're filled out this screen completely, we've entered something for the red asterisks, because those are all the mandatory fields, that we can hit add. And there we have added our test client into the project. Now we know that there's another household member and we need to add that person, so we go up to our edit bar and we're going to select add. Now the household member that we're going to add is going to be test client 5, the one we linked to test client to create a household. It's going to ask the same questions for that person. We want to define who test client 5 is in relationship to test client. So it's the head of household's child. That defines the relationship. Date information was collected and project start date can be the same. And for disabling condition, we're just going to leave that at no, but if you needed to, you could select something else. Entry comments, again, you can add those there. Now we're going to add them into the project as well. And if you'll notice up here in the underneath the caseworker section at the middle of the screen, you have 2 numbers. They're going to show us that we have both test client and test client 5. added to that project. Now we're in Test Client 5's view right now, and that's the blue button. If we want to flip over to Test Client, we can do that here. Now if you need to add or edit any information in either of these screens for either Test Client 5 or Test Client, you go to your 3-bar menu and select Edit, and that will allow you to change whatever you need to. I'm not going to change anything, so I'm going to hit Cancel. I'm going to point out that there are other options depending on your user settings. You may have copy or delete, but you should have add and edit at least. So now we have entered a household into a project as for the purposes of coordinated entry. Now that we have entered both clients in that household into the project, we can move on to the homeless CES survey by clicking on the next item. This brings up the blank survey screen, and we want to define first what type of survey it was. Since this is a family, we're going to select family survey. And this next question needs to be read verbatim to the client before answering yes or no. So let's just say they agreed and say yes. So the date survey started is the date that you're filling it out. It's possible to backdate that, but typically you just use the date that you're opening the form to fill it out. Responsible agency and organization name, there's predefined options there. These are all agencies within the COC. Now, you want to put the agency that you belong to in here. So you don't want to select coordinated entry because all agencies have access to that. We want to know which agency did the intake and filled out this form. So I'm going to select ATCA. The surveyor name is your name. I'll put mine. Survey time is not mandatory, but there's a little clock icon you can select from. Let's just say that's the time. The location can be the agency that you work for, and data collection method, and depending on how that was done, you have several options. Next, they ask what language does the client feel best able to express themselves. It will default to English, but you can put down whatever's appropriate. Next, what county are you staying in? So we want to select that one. We're just going to say Amador. If you should select another county, you'd want to then fill that out in this field here. But I'm just going to leave that at Amador. Then in what county or counties are you seeking housing? And we'll just say Amador. Next question, do you have transportation? You mark that appropriately. And have you received housing assistance in the last year from any agency? If yes, you'll want to say what agency that was. Next section asks for family composition. So the first question, including yourself, how many adults age 18 or over are living with you? So we knew by how we constructed our family unit and linked household members that we have only, we have the parent and we have the child, and the parent is over 18, so we'll leave that at 1. The child we know is 11. For the next question, how many children under the age of 18 are currently with you? There's 1. And then they ask what the age is. So you fill that out. Then section 1D, how many children under the age of 18 are not currently with you? You're with your family, but you have reason to believe they'll be joining you. We know of no one, so this will be 0. So 1E, if the household includes a female, is any member of the family currently pregnant? It defaults to no. You can mark that as appropriate. We'll leave it at that at no. Now in the red text here, this is just how the scoring criteria is developed. You don't need to do anything with this. This will auto score once we save the survey. Down to 1F, it asks if there are any adults in the household aged 55 or older, and we know that's no, so we'll leave that at the default. Number 2, have you or any other adult in the household ever served in the military? You want to make sure to mark that yes or no, mark the appropriate one. This pulls out of reports. We want to catch all the veterans we can, so let's indicate that. 3, has there been violence in your family, or are you a survivor of domestic violence? You want to mark that as appropriate. If yes, are you currently fleeing? You would want to mark that as appropriate. I'm just going to leave that at no. If yes, are you safe now? I'm going to mark that as yes. 4, have you or other adults living with you ever been in foster care? We want to make sure we capture that. And then it asks for the monthly income. And there's a comment section you can fill out if needed. Moving down, a history of housing and homelessness. On 5, where do your family sleep most frequently? And this is a free-form text field, so you can answer whatever the appropriate answer is. And the homeless status, if they're living in a place not meant for human habitation, it's going to be category 1, homeless. Living situation, type of residence at entry, so where were they prior to seeking assistance? I'm just going to select that. Length of stay in that situation, 1 night or less. On the night before, did the client stay in the streets, emergency shelter, or safe haven? No, they did not. And then approximate date homelessness started. We'll just mark that. Number of times homeless in the past 3 years, including today. We'll just leave it 1 time. Now, you'll notice that we did already go through this in the Client Enters Project screen, because these are scoring criteria and project and HUD required elements of the project entry. So you'll see these same questions and options in other forms as well. Then it asks us total number of months homeless in the past 3 years. Again, 1 month. And then it asks, do you or anyone else in your household have a diagnosed physical or mental health condition that is disabling? Make that yes. Moving down to section B, risks. It asks, in the past 6 months, how many times have you or anyone in your family received health care at an emergency room? I'm just going to move through these fairly quickly. For the next one, hospital stays. How many times in the past 6 months, crisis needs? I'll just mark that 1. In the past 6 months, how many times you've been in jail? Moving on down to number 9. We'll mark no to that. 10 we'll mark no. And 12 we'll mark no. Down to the next section. We're just going to mark no there. And no there. Down to wellness. We're getting close to the end here. We're about halfway through. And I'm just going to mark something to develop a score. $27. And okay, we're done with that section. The last section is the family unit. It asks, in the last 6 months, are there any children that have been removed from the family by CPS? I'm going to say no. No there. Then 38, they anticipate any other adults or children coming to live with you. We'll just indicate no there. Okay, so we're done with the survey questions. Now what we're going to do, before we do anything else, we're going to add that survey with this blue button, and that's going to save this record. And now it refreshes and it shows a read-only screen. We can go in and edit this as necessary. This is where the score shows up. Let me scroll down to the bottom. Okay, here's our scoring. Grand total is 7. So we need to go back in. We're going to add a little bit more information here. So we're going to go to the edit section, and we want to add some contact information here at the bottom. And qualifying status, we want to add that, category 1. And potential referrals based on score and eligibility. That will just be dependent on a case-by-case basis. I'm just going to mark emergency shelter here. That's not a mandatory section. And then any contact information that you have, you can add in any of these fields here. Phone, email, and all that. So if the survey is filled out, it is considered complete or ready to be submitted. So you can leave it in progress, or you can say click submitted. And all that does is it will make the survey or that client demographic information show up at a certain place on the coordinated entry screen. Both options, either in progress or submitted, will leave that client information visible on the screen. If you should mark completed, it won't be visible on the home screen of coordinated entry, and somebody will have to simply do a search for the client and find the survey. Lastly, submitted by is also something we want to make sure is on there so we know who the responsible party is. I'm going to select update. And there we have completed the homeless coordinated entry survey. That's the single longest piece of data entry that you'll be doing in coordinated entry. And I noticed that I had forgotten to put a date survey submitted in there, so we have an opportunity to do that. We're going to go back and open the survey for editing. Select edit, and we'll come back down to the bottom where we can plug in that date. And we'll just leave it at today's date. Now we're complete. If our client was not homeless, but they were at risk of homeless, they might be eligible for homeless prevention services. So there's a survey for that as well in coordinated entry. And the first step we do is we go to the HP pre-qualification survey. And here we can see that one's already been created, or actually there's 2 of them. I'm going to add another one. And if any of these boxes can be checked, then you can move forward into the prevention survey. So I'm just going to check that box. I'm going to save this. And the prevention survey is very similar to the homeless survey. And so we're not going to go through this step by step. Just want to make sure that you've made entries for each field with an asterisk, and then save it, and the score will calculate automatically. After completing either the homeless survey or the prevention survey, the next step is to collect assessment information. This is a HUD required screen. And assessment location is the first field that we'll fill out. And that's going to be your agency location, your agency name. Assessment type, you just check the appropriate circle there. Assessment level is going to be housing needs assessment for our purposes. Assessment result type will be from a family survey, and this will ask you for the score that the survey that the client was given, what that score was. So score on their homeless survey was 5, and I can see that from up here on the screen. Their prioritization status, the best answer here is placed on a prioritization list, because that is typically what matches our workflow. It's possible that if the client self-terminates or for some other reason is not placed on the list, you can check not placed on prioritization list. Comments section is a free-form field. You can enter as much as you need to there. And to save that record, we select the little plus sign. Now we move on to the assessment events screen. And the date of event will always default to the current date. It's possible to backdate that if necessary. Now the events here, for our purposes, number 4 is the initial access event, referral to scheduled CE housing needs assessment. If you needed to add any comments on that, you can add those, and then add to save the record. So we have created a record of referral to a housing needs assessment. There's another type of referral event that we need to pay attention to, and that is this referral events section. These are all HUD predefined selections. The one that we need to pay attention to, if it's applicable, is the referral to emergency housing voucher. So if your client is indeed going to get an emergency housing voucher, this needs to be selected, because that is going to be used to document the referral, and this will go to the local housing authority for the EHV. You can add comments there, and we can select add, and that will save that record. We've looked at a couple of referral events that we can enter in here. Let's look at some of the other options and see why we have chosen what we've chosen, and talk about other options. Now, for our COC's purposes, access events number 4 was the most appropriate. It is possible that you may want to choose other options here. That will be dependent on your agency and your internal processes as to what you choose. For referral events, the same thing here. This will be an internal discussion in your agency to choose what is most appropriate. The only strict rule for HUD is the referral to emergency housing voucher. That selection has to be made if indeed the client is going to apply for that. So these options are flexible and dependent on your agency and your needs and your workflow. Now that we've completed our assessment event screen, we can move to the client referral screen. And it's in this screen where we're going to document the referral made to another agency or a referral made to another department within your agency. So the date will default to the date that we're doing the referral. You can backdate that if you needed to. The agency referred to, these are predefined departments. This list is flexible and can be modified to your needs. I'm going to select ATCA here. Client phone number, you can just type it in, it will format for you. The status of the referral. Typically referred is what we use. Any of these can be appropriate if that meets your needs. I'm just going to use referred. And referral comments, the field I believe takes about 500 characters, so you can write all you need to in there. And then to save that, you click a little plus sign and you have the referral record created. Now there's a functionality built into this that will send an email to predefined recipients at any of the agencies listed in our COC, in our HMIS system. So in our training database, this is not functional, and I will include a screenshot of the live database and what that looks like, because this button will be blue, and then I'll include what the recipient of the email will see once that email referral has been done. This is a view of the live database and what that email referral screen looks like. The button will be blue, and if you click on it, it will display that same record and it'll confirm that an email has been sent to the recipient. This is a sample of what the email recipient will see from that referral email. The subject will read coordinated entry referral. The following coordinated entry referral has been made. It'll give a date, by whom the referral was made, and a client card ID. So an agency that uses our HMIS will be able to look up this client card ID to identify the client. Once you've completed the client referral screen, you can move down to the notes screen. Now this screen is optional, it's not mandatory. It just depends on your agency's policies, whether or not you'll use it. But the way you fill it out is typically the date will default to the current date. You can select face-to-face here or whatever's appropriate. And then this text field will hold about 1,000 characters, I believe, and so it's plenty lengthy. You need to enter something in there in order to be able to save the record. Once a client has been enrolled in a housing project in HMIS in any agency, their enrollment in coordinated entry ends, and they must be exited from the SPDAT project. Typically, this exit will be done by the HMIS user whom has created the most recent enrollment record for a client in an HMIS housing project. To complete this exit, you go to the Client Exits Project screen. And when you land on that screen, you may be in another household member's record rather than the head of household's record. We want to make sure we start with the head of household and applicant. So here we see that we have test client 5. We know that that's a child of the applicant, so we're going to flip over to test client's record because we know they're the applicant and head of household. To get to the screen we need to where we can put in an exit date, we go to Edit, and under Project Exit Date we're going to enter the date. We'll just use today's date. Destination, we're going to use a permanent housing destination. And if in that list there's not the option that you need, you can put in a destination here in this field. Any exit comments that you need to make can go in that field. And next we're going to select Update. And we see that for test client we now have a project exit record and a destination. Now we need to do the same for the household members, and we don't need to flip over to the other household members screen to do this. We can simply select Exit Household Members. And here we see that the exit date and destination have now been applied to our other household member. So with that, we've completed an exit for this household. In this video, you have seen the entire process of creating a client in the coordinated entry system using the client demographics screen, and you've created an address for the client. You have created a household through the linked household members screen, enrolled clients in a project, and completed the client enters project screens. Completed a client needs survey, recorded HUD data for assessment information and assessment events, completed a client referral and sent a referral email, reviewed the optional notes screen. And lastly, you've exited a client from the coordinated entry system after they have obtained housing. We hope that you have found this training useful and will refer back to it as needed. Thank you for watching.